Hello, welcome back to our psychological health talks. For the next month, we're going to take a look at some of the psychological effects in workplaces and what to know about how to do that. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to talk about bringing the science of happiness into work. So work is one of the places that we spend the majority of our adult lives. If we're working full time, that's a minimum of 40 hours per week. During the time that we're scheduled to work, that means that travel back and forth to work and time at work typically is more than half of our waking hours. So it becomes an important element. Now, what we're going to look at today, I'm going to go through more slides than usual, and we're going to go through them rather rapidly, especially at the beginning, because this was originally a 90-minute talk, and I'm condensing it into a 30-minute time frame, but we're going to look at key factors that have to do with how we're going to be able to function at work. So we're going to look at a number of different things. We're going to look at a survey. A survey actually comes from 2021, and I'll explain a little why we're using that particular one. We're going to look at positive psychology at work and some of the implications of that and some of the resources that might be available. So let's get started. So I'm going to take a look at a survey that was done by the American Psychological Association. Now, the American Psychological Association every year does a Stress in America survey. In 2021, they focused primarily the stress at work, and this was, of course, during the pandemic, so there was lots of stress going on, but the data that comes from it is still pretty true. Some cases a little worse than it was back in 2021. So we're going to take a look at that survey to kind of give us just an idea of where people were at that time and where the current status of the workplace is today. So we're going to start by looking at the questions that were on the survey about financial insecurity and what that meant. So I worry about not having enough money to pay for my living expenses. In 2021, in this American Psychological Association survey, 58% of Americans said even though they were working, they worried that they would not have enough to pay for living expenses. Because of inflation, because of the fact that wages have been steady or slowly rising since then, this might actually be an underestimate of how many people feel about it today. Second question, I am paid enough to save 3 months worth of expenses for an emergency. This is something that's often recommended for individuals when they're working, that you take the excess of the pay that you're getting and you put it in an account for emergencies. Clearly that's not possible for many people, and what we saw was that only 40% of those surveyed were able to actually accomplish this goal of having enough in reserve that if there was an emergency, they could survive for 3 months without a paycheck before they were in dire straits. I am unable to afford my or my family's health care costs. At the time that this was done, about 34% said they were unable to afford their medical insurance. We know that recently that is rising. There are less affordable options than there were in 2021, and so this is becoming more of a difficulty, more of a financial insecurity than it was before. So the next set of questions involved employee burnout. I feel emotionally drained from my work. So about 83% of respondents in 2021 said they feel emotionally drained from the work that they were doing. This number is going to be about the same as it was back then. Now, many people find themselves working very hard, putting an extraordinary amount of energy into it, and they feel drained. It is not feeling like they are getting what they need from that, and so they have that feeling. I strongly agree that my workplace affects my mental health. Obviously, this is something that is important. So 71% agreed that it strongly affects their mental health. Only 2% disagreed. The other are people who are neutral. They didn't say that they agreed or disagreed with it, but a large number of people say that their workplace affects their mental health, and that's one of the reasons we're going to be focusing on that more this month. What about supervisor support? So when you're thinking about your boss, my supervisor provides emotional support to help me manage my stress. About 41%, less than half, felt that their supervisors were giving them enough support to help them to manage. Most people in this survey felt that they were kind of on their own with that. It is the case that some supervisors are better on that than others. I can talk to my supervisor to change stressful things about work. Again, a little less than half were able to say that that was the case, that they felt like they could address those kinds of things with their supervisor to make some changes to alleviate unnecessary stress. About a little over half felt like that was not an option for them. I know what resources I can use if I feel like I need emotional support. This may not be the supervisor; it may be other structural elements of the workplace that can help you with that. And 60%, over half, said that they had some resources at least to help them. Not necessarily with their supervisor, not necessarily immediate help, but something that they could do that would be able to help them to manage their stress. We're going to talk about some of those in the remaining time that we have here today. So workplace stress and mental illness. My workplace affects my mental health. Again, 86% felt like the workplace at least had an impact. I'm assuming that most of those felt that the impact was relatively negative rather than positive, although this particular question doesn't distinguish between those two things. I feel distracted and find it difficult to concentrate because of my work environment. About 2/3 felt that the work environment was distracting or the stress was distracting. It is the case that when we are under significant amounts of stress, it is harder to focus, harder to pay attention, we're more easily distracted. I spend time looking for a new position. In 2021, about a little over half were considering looking for a new position. Today, with our current job numbers, in 2026, that's harder to do because the jobs are not readily available. The hiring is slower. It's harder for people to leave their jobs and find another job. They still may be looking. They still may be trying to find a new job, but finding a new job is more difficult right now than it was a few years ago. So. Let's take a look, first of all, at job satisfaction. And one of the things that we find is that with job satisfaction, there are confused research results. Sometimes job satisfaction seems to really make a difference in the outcomes for businesses. Sometimes some of the data suggests that when people are satisfied, it doesn't necessarily impact the bottom line. On rare occasions, it actually can. The businesses feel like having workers that are too satisfied might detract from their ability to get the most productivity out of their workforce. In general, though, in the long run, one of the things we notice is that if people are happier at work, if people are more satisfied with the jobs that they're doing, they're more likely in the long run to work harder, they're more likely to be more productive, they're more likely to contribute to the welfare of the business. The lower the wage, the less likely this is to be true, because job satisfaction for very low wage jobs tend to be jobs that are menial, factory assembly, things like that, and therefore in those situations oftentimes job satisfaction comes from the relationships with other workers, and sometimes those relationships can interfere with productivity. The higher the job complexity, the more job satisfaction matters in being able to feel like you are getting benefit from your work, and that the workplace is also benefiting from it. In terms of getting to a place where we can have more satisfaction in our jobs and a more healthy workplace, there are no shortcuts to getting any place that's worth going. So there's some work to be done in order to get there. By the way, this individual who's driving this car is me when I was about, I would guess, 5 years old or so. My father was a photographer and as a part-time work, and he snapped this picture of me, and so that's my first driving experience. I didn't actually drive the car, by the way. So one of the things we want to do is take a quick look at the brain research and what that says about whether or not we can be happy at work. And there's a few key factors that I want to cover as we get started. So the first thing is that we have research that suggests that the brain is split in two. So there's a left half of our brain, there's a right half of our brain. We've talked a little bit about this in previous psychological health talks, and we'll talk about it in the future, I'm sure. But one of the things that we notice in these kinds of studies is that when we look at whether or not we are happy or not, the left prefrontal cortex, so over the left eye, right behind the forehead, is the area that seems to be most active when we are reporting that we are feeling happy. And the right prefrontal cortex, over the right eye just behind the forehead, is the part that tends to be most active when we're depressed or anxious or worried about things. One of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to activate that left prefrontal cortex more. So the right prefrontal cortex is where we tend to worry, tend to have more depressed feelings. It's more subtle than that, but for our purposes, we'll kind of go there. The left prefrontal cortex is where we get the benefit of feeling better and feeling happier. Now, it turns out that it is also the case that the brain is more like a muscle than we thought. I'm going to back up on this for a second. So if we are happier at work, that strengthens the ability to feel happier at work. If we're worried at work, that strengthens the ability to feel worried at work. We get better at what we practice. And one of the things that we find is that the brain actually starts to modify itself so that in people who are more depressed, they have a slightly larger right prefrontal cortex, and people who are more satisfied have a slightly larger left prefrontal cortex. Part of the implication for that is that if I'm in a work situation in which I am constantly strained, constantly stressed, constantly dissatisfied, it becomes easier to be strained and stressed and dissatisfied over time, And so it has this kind of spiraling effect. It can spiral downward or it can spiral upward, depending on the environment that is established. And for that reason, although we are going to talk about some individual things that we need to do in order to be bringing the science of happiness to work, the environment, the structure of the workplace is also important. And if you're watching this video and you have the ability to affect the structure of your workplace, don't ignore this. If you can create an atmosphere where people feel positive, they feel like they're contributing, they feel like what they're doing has meaning and purpose, it actually builds on itself, and they will help you to build a workplace that has more of that, which in the long run is likely to be much more successful. So the other piece of the brain that we want to really pay attention to is something called a mirror neuron system. And what that means is that we have neurons in our brains that pay attention to the relational aspect of human interaction. So when we are interacting with a coworker or a customer or our boss, we are picking up signals from them and giving off signals to them that activate mirror neurons and cause us to connect on an emotional level. So that can be positive or it can be negative. And anybody who has small children can see how quickly the mirror neuron system works. When one member of the family is grumpy, it affects other members of the family. When one member of the work team is grumpy, it easily affects other members of the work team. One of the things we don't recognize and we don't pay enough attention to is that if I can bring a positive energy to my workplace, that also has an impact because that brings positive energy to my teammates and to the work environment. All right, so what are some of the implications? So we're going to look at two separate ways to take a look at this. The first area is, what can I do, regardless of my position in the workplace? If I'm a boss, if I'm an owner, if I'm a worker, what are some of the things that I can do that will affect my ability to be happier in the workplace? We're also going to spend some time then looking at what are some of the structural elements of a good workplace that will promote our ability to create a workplace that fosters that kind of happiness and that kind of satisfaction. So, as I mentioned before, the brain is more like a muscle than we ever thought, and how we use it begins to be much more the condition in which we are likely to be leaning in any kind of situation. So if I am constantly working on bringing a positive atmosphere for myself in my workplace, over time that becomes easier and easier to do. If I go to the gym and I start working out and I'm lifting weights and doing all of that, over time, what happens is that my muscles get stronger. And as my muscles get stronger, the same weight feels lighter than it did when I first started. And as I add more weight, my muscles continue to get stronger and it continues to grow. It turns out that the brain is very much like this, and we have studies that show that people who are more positive actually change the shape of their brain in such a way that it supports that positivity more. People who are more negative over time find it easier and easier to be negative. So one of the ways that we do this is by becoming more mindful in the workplace. Mindfulness sometimes it gets confused. Mindfulness is not about being relaxed or peaceful all the time. It's about being more aware. And having a higher level of awareness brings with it an important ability. So if I'm aware of what's going on in me and around me in my workplace, then I can choose the subtle adjustments that I need to make things better. If I'm less aware, then I am less able to make those adjustments. That's one of the reasons why substance abuse is such a problem, because substance abuse makes a person less aware. Hopefully that's not happening in the workplace, but even when it does, and it does sometimes, being less aware makes me less able to adjust and more a victim of the environment that I'm in rather than me having control in those situations. So developing the ability to be mindful is an important tool that I can use that will allow me over time to have a more and more satisfying workplace, because I'm able to make the adjustments that I need to make. If I just had a very stressful encounter with a customer, I can make the adjustment to say, okay, that was an encounter. The next customer that I'm interacting with isn't necessarily in the same place. I don't need to treat them the same way. I can come at it fresh. That's an example of an adjustment because I'm mindful. So we want to make sure that we're developing that skill. Now, meditation isn't the same thing as mindfulness, and I talked about that previously in my introduction to mindfulness talk on the Psychological Health Talks. Meditation is an opportunity to practice being aware. But the purpose of the practice is so that I can be aware in my daily life, so that as I'm going through my interaction with my coworkers, trying to get a work task accomplished, interacting with customers, I'm much more aware of who I am, where I am, and what's going on around me. A second thing is that there's a positive to negative ratio, and I talked a little bit about this in a previous talk too, but we have a negativity bias, meaning that we overvalue negative events. If I have a negative interaction with my boss, it lasts longer in my awareness than if I have a positive interaction with somebody. And that ratio is actually about 3 to 1, where if we can pay attention to 3 times as many positive interactions as negative interactions, it starts to balance out. So if my boss comes to me and is able to identify very specifically things I'm doing well, and they do that 3 times as often as they do a correction, what ends up happening is it's easier for me to listen to that correction without becoming overwhelmed by it, to be able to make the correction and continue to be able to recognize the things that I do really well. Some of that is paying attention, because one of the things that happens is that we become used to the positive things that are occurring. So if I'm interacting with a coworker and they're complimentary, and day after day they're complimentary, over time I just become used to it, and so it becomes harder for me to notice unless I choose to pay attention to it. So make sure you choose to pay attention to the positive interactions that you have at work. The third thing you can do is develop compassion. So we'll get into this in a future talk, but the quickest way to go from a sour mood to a happier mood is to pay attention to what I'm grateful for. So paying attention to noticing things that are going well in my life. The most effective way for the long run to have the deepest levels of happiness is found in the things that I do to help other people. We don't have to really look very far to recognize that. If you think about one of the things that you enjoy about being in love with somebody, some of it, a lot of it is that you're able to do things that make that person happy. And when you do that, you feel happier. It isn't that doing something for someone is a selfless act. It is that it helps them, and part of the effect of it helping them is that it also helps me. So developing that ability to be compassionate is a really critical piece in long-term happiness, and to bring that into our workplace. Where are the opportunities that I can actually help? So let's take a look at some of the resources that might be available within the workplace that can help us to structurally have a workplace that will promote a happier, more productive environment. So there's a number of them, and we're going to take a look at several of them. I've got trainers and mentors and coaches kind of at the outskirts because I'm not going to talk about those today. But I'm going to talk about employee assistance programs. I'm going to talk about wellness programs, mental health treatment and where that fits, and what a consulting psychologist can do in a workplace to create this kind of environment. So first of all, an employee assistance program. Many companies now have employee assistance programs. They're designed to be very inexpensive. Essentially, for most employees, they don't pay for using their employee assistance program. It is primarily focused on short-term issues. So there are a few sessions that are given with a person who's trained, an employee assistance professional, who can help you work through very specific kinds of issues. You've got a relationship issues, you've got a financial issue, you've got some legal questions. All of those things might be things that you can access in your employee assistance program. They're not meant to be long-term changes. They're meant to be short-term kinds of benefits. Excuse me. Now the next thing is a wellness program. A wellness program is a supportive, ideally integrative system in which there's an effort to prevent future problems. This is actually one of the more difficult things for human beings to do. We tend to focus on immediate problems, and if there's a future problem, it's harder for us to do something about it. And in an effective wellness program, one of the things that happens is that there aren't future problems. So it's harder to recognize the value of it because the things that might have happened that would be terribly disruptive don't happen because the employees are taking care of themselves. And that might be physical health, it might be mental health, it might be financial health. It could be a variety of things that wellness program helps with in order to help that particular employee have fewer problems in the future. For those individuals who are undergoing significant issues, and that might be workplace related, it might be there might be other sources for it, but it affects the workplace. Mental health treatment needs to be available in order for individuals who can take advantage of that to deal with more difficult issues that aren't going to go away on their own and are going to need the help of a professional who helps you to intervene and make choices, make adjustments, either with medication or psychotherapy, ideally both, that helps you to establish a new path and do better. Finally, there is the ability for a consulting psychologist to work with an organization that will help that organization to put in the systems in place to help employers be more supportive, help employees to be able to be more mindful and take care of themselves better and be more productive, to help with the kinds of planning, because in the most effective companies, it's not just about the financial bottom line. It's about putting the systems in place so that the most valuable resource in any organization is the human capital, the people that work there, the people that make the organization work. Even in the age of the beginnings of AI, we're going to see that human capital is still essential to make an organization really truly work and really truly be a place where the business is good and the individual is taken care of. We'll talk a little bit more about this next week when I talk about the psychological healthy workplace and what that culture looks like. But for today, understand that there is a role for a psychologist, perhaps even on the board of directors, to help to make sure that that really important dimension is taken into account in any organization. So there are many different kinds of resources. These are just a few that I used for this talk, so it's on the slide. You can go back to it if you need it. But next week, again, we will be looking at the psychologically healthy workplace that will build on what we talked about today in bringing the science of happiness to work. So watch the video, like it if it seems important to you. Be sure and come back for new talks as we go along. I appreciate your attention, and stay with us for new psychological health talks. Thanks.